Adelaide is a wonderful city in a special and unique region of Australia. The city and its greater metropolitan area are at the gateway to Australia's premier wine country, the outback, Kangaroo Island, the south coastal region, and the extensive wildlife found throughout. And in the urbanized areas, there are rich cultural, sporting, and intellectual challenges. The attractiveness of the area is attested to by the commitment of the population to their way of life and to providing a sustainable and quality environment to their children and to future generations. And while these attributes are striking and wonderful, Adelaide has neither, in my view, fulfilled its potential fully or met the new challenges facing it. First and foremost, the spread-out development patterns have threatened rich agricultural lands and sped up environmental degradation. And within its current boundaries, the greater metropolitan area has ensured that families have had to locate far from their necessary destinations of jobs and shopping, and consequently, they must drive substantial distances. The result has been challenges to their budgets, the environment through the increased auto pollution, and to their family time by having to spend so much time in travel. These choices to spread out have been driven by affordability, as well as a perception, and I believe only a perception, that this lifestyle produces a higher quality of life. The question facing Adelaide is how to ensure that not only is the quality of life people enjoy today to remain, but how can it in fact be enhanced? And the clock to answer this vital question is ticking, particularly in the face of a projected population growth of 500,000 people. For as we all know, once created, the built environment is very difficult to alter or retrofit. And it is the built environment that is the greatest determiner of our travel patterns that over the past nearly 3/4 of the century have meant that we drive further and further distances, drive to activities and places where previous generations would walk or bike or take public transit, and that the result has been a degradation of our quality of life, more pollution, and more time away from family and friends as the only way to accommodate this spread-out development pattern. Recent research also shows another and perhaps more critical result of this development pattern: record obesity rates. When driving is the only option for travel, then normal walking and biking are abandoned. This has been particularly acute among school-aged children, where the spike in obesity rates has been most pronounced. A study evaluating transit-friendly neighborhoods and thereby walk-friendly neighborhoods in my community, Portland, have found that every walking trip that is either connecting to transit or to just their final destination ends up producing health benefits. The study found that on average, residents who were in those very pedestrian-friendly communities, places where there was footpaths, safe crossings of streets, other things, weighed about 5 pounds less, a little over 2.2 kilos, than residents in non-transit-friendly neighborhoods. And significantly, the extra weight translated directly into additional health care costs, right around $5,500 per year per resident. And with the cost of health care skyrocketing most places around the world, and the cost of providing health care here in South Australia threatening to consume greater and greater shares of the state budget, these trends must be stopped and, in fact, reversed. It is a responsibility, I believe, of those guiding the future of Greater Adelaide area to demonstrate how a different development pattern, one that is denser around nodes, has mixed-use activities, access to convenient, frequent, and high-quality public transportation, is exciting and has inviting open spaces, will not only meet the needs of our population, but in fact will achieve a vision for Adelaide's future. And these efforts must be focused not on a single pattern for what new development must look like. It must embrace a variety of patterns that give people choices for how to meet their individually selected aspirations. As this new style of development is built, we will see individuals and families seeking them out, having grown weary of the need for a car for even the simplest of travel needs. As more residents arrive in these developments, businesses who want to cater to them will also seek places to do their business in or near them. Employers seeking to attract and retain good employees also understand that more and more, and particularly among those younger generations that are entering the workforce, that the value of time is very important, and the willingness to use that time for longer and longer commutes is not attractive. In turn, those employers will likewise seek to be located in close proximity to where they seek new or want to retain existing employees. The attractiveness of living and working in these vibrant communities will also attract young and creative individuals who want to make their mark, start a business, or launch a new adventure, as we refer to the group of young and restless, out of which will come the next Bill Gates, or in my community, the next Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. And all of this will produce a spiraling force making these communities the future of Adelaide. In addition, these new communities can revitalize and economically stimulate activity in areas that have great potential but have been long neglected. The individuals living in these areas will also benefit by saving money not being spent on unnecessary travel. Likewise, with these developments becoming attractive places to live and work, property values will rise. And for the vast majority of our population, the largest equity investment they have is their home. And the rising value of that home increases their ability to achieve their aspirations, everything from remodeling their home to be what they want, pursuing recreational opportunities nearby, or helping to pay for sending their children to university. Key to making this work is the infrastructure that is determinative of how neighborhoods develop and evolve. If there are only roads and streets, then the only choice is to drive to one's destination. If there are footpaths, safe street crossings, safe and substantial bike lanes, then people have choices about how they get to their destinations. And those destinations, the grocery store, the coffee shop, the restaurants, the school for their children, and hundreds of other activities must be accessible by walking and biking. There are many responsible parties to achieve the vision of a more walkable, bikeable, livable, and sustainable community. First, government is the largest investor in public infrastructure and must make those investments the way the tram to North Terrace and now to the Entertainment District has helped be able to begin to achieve the 30-year plan goals. And second, government also regulates the type of development that occurs and likewise must ensure that it doesn't thwart those goals as it has so often in the past through policies such as exclusionary zoning. Third, government provides many incentives and disincentives to individuals and businesses to the use of the tax code. And likewise, in this area, government must ensure that the tax code is fully in alignment with these goals. Ways must be found to ensure that each project, each public investment will leverage other investments from the private sector to get the maximum gain and achieve these ambitious goals embodied in the 30-year plan. New tools, new incentives must be put in place to make this possible. And lastly, government must ensure that all of its decisions are fully involving the citizenry in those decisions and that the processes used to reach decisions are fully transparent. Government needs to provide the education and outreach necessary so that citizens may know what and why these ambitious plans are being undertaken. What will be the result, and how will this improve the well-being of the community? More is needed than just general education. The planners and designers, the builders and engineers, the developers, the architects, a host of other professionals must also be educated, if they are not already so, on how each of the hundreds of decisions they make in their own professions are connected to the community as a whole, and that those decisions must be made in a way that promotes the values, the goals, and the sustainability of the greater Adelaide region. For if this is not done, we will clearly have a tragedy of the commons. And as important as the role of the government plays in achieving these goals, they are by no means alone in this effort. The private sector is an absolute key partner, from the architects who can design exciting and inviting structures to developers who can see their creation in a holistic and connected nature, to builders who can build to the highest standards. All must share the values and be committed to the goals. And at the top of the pyramid is you, the citizenry. You and your neighbors must take an active role in making certain that the future of Adelaide is every bit of your business, from where you want to live and work, how you want to get around, and how to spend your time, and how you want an Adelaide of the future to look for and function for both your children and their children. My report contains a series of recommendations and conclusions. It is not a report aimed at transplanting another city's or region's idea wholesale to the greater Adelaide area, but to learn from the best that is offered by other communities around the world to incorporate them in a way that is uniquely Adelaidean. My specific recommendations fall into 5 categories. First, to be able to have a dramatic increased investment, which is already underway in public transport and which the Premier spoke to. 2 is making the pedestrian the center of transportation planning. 3, the creation of a planning and urban development authority to guide and encourage new development patterns. 4, to make community engagement a real, meaningful, and transparent process. And finally, 5th, to create mechanisms to ensure that groups that have traditionally been excluded, women, minorities, from the infrastructure investments and the benefits that they have brought, to be able to fully participate in those. Let me turn to the first. One of the largest, if not the largest, non-defense or entitlement expenditure made by government is transportation infrastructure. And historically, that infrastructure has been aimed at meeting a perceived need, not as an effort to shape how our communities function. In short, transportation infrastructure investments have in the past been not strategic, but rather reactive. One thing we know for certain: when we build roads in green fields, sprawl will follow, whether it be strip malls or residences. What we also know is that if we make smart and strategic investments in transportation, we can alter how we grow, providing individuals and families with choices on where and how they want to live. In truth, the last 70 years throughout much of the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as other locations throughout the world, have been built on a transportation system based on $30 a barrel oil. We need to build our future transportation system on a carbon-constrained and finite supply of oil, and at a price per barrel of at least $90, a price that many economists consider to be the absolute floor for future oil. We achieve this vision by utilizing rigorous economic analysis that is based on least cost planning concepts. This will ensure that the most cost-effective transportation investments are made. In some cases, this will mean that the best way to provide mobility will be with investments in public transportation, in bike and pedestrian facilities. And just as electrical power companies have found investments in conservation a more cost-effective strategy than building more power plants, so will investments in pedestrians, bike, and public transport be more cost-effective than additional road construction. Transportation investments must also take into account the full cost of travel patterns, everything from climate change to the cost shift that occurs when development patterns require businesses, individuals, and families to spend more of their budgets on unnecessary transportation. Public transportation in Adelaide must be dramatically increased and enhanced. First and foremost is making future investments in the tram as the Premier outlined, extending to other parts of the greater Adelaide region. The next extension should be, in my view, to complete a loop around the central business district of Adelaide. In this case, such an extension would not only bring a terrific circulator around the whole city, it would also spur development and redevelopment. For as we have seen in my home of Portland, Oregon, investments in an urban-scale tram have been transformational. It has released the energy and excitement that became a catalyst for the creation of a new neighborhood, the Pearl District, a neighborhood characterized by its vitality and vibrancy. The Pearl has become a world-recognized example of how to create a walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly community. Let me share some photos for those of you who have not been there and maybe have only heard about it. First, as I mentioned earlier, the investment in what we call streetcar, your tram, you couldn't tell the difference if you looked at them, has been transformational. It spurred the kind of development that we wanted to be able to see. And this is one shot of the community. A part of it is a very diverse, both in density as well in mixture of architecture. It also, as you see, if you can clearly enough on the roadway there, that is a pathway for our tram. Right in the middle of our two-way streets, two-lane streets, where there are stop signs or traffic signals every 2 blocks. And in Portland, our blocks are very short, about 60 meters square. And it was said, at least, that our forefathers were told that retail outlets did better if they had corner spaces. Consequently, they created more spaces by making very short blocks. But what you see here is a part of the community. Another element of the tram and a chance to be able to really see it in front of a residential building, again with the first floor being activities such as coffee shops, restaurants, and others. We also created public spaces, not just green grass, but active places. This, a water feature in the center of one of our blocks, park blocks, that really is a place that people congregate. Another shot of that same water feature from a different angle with, again, a residential building with ground floor being the ultimate activities of mixed uses. Another shot of that same area looking down on it. We also think that public art is another part of what really enhances a community. This totem, double purpose, it actually also serves as a support for the wires to electrify our streetcar. Oops. We also think that public art is important around our stations, our train stations. In this case, looking at what would be looking like a plant is really trying to be reminiscent of what we refer to as the Silicon Forest, Silicon Valley, the area in California, which really spawned much of the high-tech area, has an offshoot. We refer to it as the Silicon Forest. But it also must be people active, places where people want to be, and a chance to be able to sit out, spill out on the sidewalk, and see activities. Another shot at night, again, it needs to be active at all different hours. I could almost get away with saying that this is a shot also in the Pearl District, but some of you will immediately recognize it from here in Adelaide, the Nano site on Ebenezer Street on the east side. Another shot here in Adelaide, but again, that capturing of places where people want to be and want to be very active. Another one here in Hyde Park, again, here in Adelaide. And one last one, a couple enjoying a cup of coffee with their bikes. Well, our development, although we'll be coming back to it, in many ways looks similar to some of your lower level, that is in height, type of development. These are called the Johnson Street townhomes. They're a part of the Pearl District, but it gives you a flavor of, in this case, a three-story buildings that were very popular. And if you look at this scene here from Adelaide, again, see some of the new infill that's going on, and that is, I think, architecturally interesting. Another place here in the southern part of the city, likewise, not very tall, but still, again, an interesting place that draws people. And this on Charles Street in Unley, the street on which I am staying, and was struck by a repurposing of a building to be able to be, again, a residence. Well, what this tells us, though, is that you don't have some of the more dense development that will, in fact, ensure that an exciting, vibrant urban community can be created. And here's a shot back to the Pearl District. Interesting architecture, a place that also mixes scale. The lower buildings in the front, along with different treatments. And lastly, in the same setting, a different look. And if you can see there are, in fact, a building a little bit in the background that has the patios created by very narrow, pointed patios that continue to be able to get longer as you go up the building. Again, a part of the interesting architecture that's there. Well, what is the result we have seen in the Pearl District about those travel patterns that I've been talking about? What you see in this community is that people who live here are using transit on average 9.5 times more often than their counterparts in the rest of the greater Portland region. And the Portland region is pretty transit intense. Second, they walk 4.5 times more likely than their counterparts and bike 2.4 times more than their counterparts. Again, bringing proof to the fact that when you provide places that are interesting, walkable, exciting, vibrant places, people take advantage of them. Well, as important as the tram extensions are, we must also recognize that for much of our existing population here in Adelaide, buses will best serve further out and less densely populated areas. This will require the acquisition of new bus fleets that are environmentally cleaner. It will mean many more buses going many more places and at substantially increased frequencies and spanning much larger portions of all 7 days of the week. The connections between rail, tram, and buses must also be coordinated to ensure easy, quick, and seamless transfers, thereby accommodating travel to any and all parts of our region. Another improvement involves use of information. We should provide people with easily accessible real-time information on the arrival and expected time to reach their destinations for every bus, train, and tram. Real-time is focused not on what the schedule says, but on the actual countdown in minutes for when the vehicle will arrive at the designated stop. All of us who are regular transit users know that we do what I refer to as the transit dance. And that is, you get up to the stop, you look down the pathway to see if the vehicle's coming, you pace several times back and forth, look at your watch, and start the process over again. What real-time information does is ensure that you know if it's going to arrive in 8 minutes, you have time to go pick up a cup of coffee or something else, or maybe just sit and relax and know that you haven't just missed a vehicle. In this case, public transport in South Australia is very close to making real-time information available for all their buses, trams, and trains. They are to be roundly commended for this. And these data that really allow for that real-time information needs to be made available to you, the riding public. And when that happens, we find, as we did in Portland, that individual riders found different apps to be able to develop, to use for what their needs were. And we would publish those on our website and end up being a place where others could download those apps and use them as well. One of my favorites is an individual who continually fell asleep on the bus and would miss his bus stop and go beyond it. So he ended up developing an app that would give him an alarm to wake him up just beforehand so he could get off. But if you think about it, so often in public transport, as in other things, a thing that works for one purpose can be used for many others. In this case, people who are sight impaired or maybe aren't knowing a neighborhood to know where their stop should be, likewise can use that app to be able to get off. There are additional steps to be taken to further enhance the functionality of public transport. Buses and trains must also be, in my view, be given signal prioritization. For buses, this means at least when they are running behind schedule, they can call for a green light a few seconds early or hold a green light a few seconds longer as a means of getting passengers to their destinations closer to being on time. For trams, they should be able to call for a green light, overriding the other vehicle traffic signal rotations to whisk them through intersections. All of this will improve the public transport operations. The second major area of my recommendation focuses on making the pedestrian the center of transportation planning. Walking is an essential part of our daily lives. Traditionally, we celebrate a child's first walking. We have historically walked to school. Even our parents or grandparents took pride in their walking to and from schools in inclement weather. And amazingly, and apparently in defiance of the laws of physics, they were able to walk uphill in both directions. And it is some sad that in many communities, people drive to shopping malls to be able to walk in a safe location. It does seem a little out of whack that we don't have the very footpaths and other connections that allow them to walk in their own neighborhoods. To this end, I recommend that the Premier and the Minister of Transport direct the development of a transport plan that upends the current approach of really changing the hierarchy that places the mobility of vehicles as its number one goal, and move to a hierarchy that focuses on the pedestrian. This plan should also be built upon the road hierarchy recommended by my fellow thinker, Fred Wegman, who focused on road safety. This hierarchy recognizes that there are major arterials where they need to be moving of vehicles and freight in large numbers, but that for other streets, we must have the pedestrian be at the center of the planning for that to really allow for the kind of neighborhoods to be created. Let me be clear, this is not about being anti-vehicle, but rather about being pro-people. The results will be profound. In new neighborhoods, we will ensure that the ability to walk will not be compromised by the needs of the vehicle. We will ensure that in these neighborhoods that vital retail services will be within walking distances of residents. We will ensure that bicycling will also be highlighted. Improvements also must be made in how pedestrians interact with vehicles in a day-to-day operations. Safer pedestrian movements can be achieved through more signalized pedestrian crossings. The timing allowed for a walk signal must be increased. By law, the pedestrian should be given the right-of-way over a vehicle, although this happens more in the breach than it does by rule. And as a result, enforcement must be put in place. And as these streets become less thoroughfares and more boulevard-like, not unlike what Paris is celebrated for, we will build neighborhoods rather than having roads become virtual walls that separate them. Let me turn to bikes. Biking has often been thought of for adults as recreation. In the last decade, however, for an increasing number of adults, biking has moved from recreation to a mode of transport. Adelaide has the opportunity to become one of the most bike-friendly cities in the world. Topography, weather contributes to this. But for the novice or beginning bike commuter, a safer environment must be created. A large part of that will be achieved because a pedestrian-friendly environment will also become a bike-friendly environment. Thank you, Jeremy. And it is certainly ironic to imagine a long line of cars stalled in traffic and to be able to realize that individuals in that stalled traffic are waiting to get to the gym so they can ride a stationary bicycle. At the same time, a bicycle is zipping by. My third major area of recommendations revolves around public infrastructure. The infrastructure attendant to major development and redevelopment is a source of constant debate and friction between those responsible for delivering that infrastructure and those being asked to pay for it. Everything from sewers, water, roads, streetlights, enhanced intersections, open spaces, public art, and many things in between needs to be evaluated and provided for. And it's not just the building of infrastructure, it is also its maintenance. Scant attention is paid to the ongoing operational and maintenance needs of public infrastructure. Consequently, we see open spaces that are poorly maintained. The pressure on local governments, who are often strapped for financial resources, are blamed for not doing a better job of maintaining these spaces and offering alternative uses. I recommend that the Premier and Cabinet create a Planning and Urban Development Authority to do at least three key things. First, it must develop a policy framework in which the costs for this infrastructure are identified and evaluated. Then a system must be developed that fairly, and I emphasize fairly, allocates costs across a complex set of possible investments and that provides the framework for how ongoing costs for those investments will be allocated. Second, the authority should be charged with the task of ongoing monitoring of decisions surrounding investments in infrastructure and the public realm aimed at achieving the 30-year plan, and have the authority to step in and alter agreements that are inconsistent with this policy framework. Third, the authority must be able to acquire and consolidate land holdings to permit the redevelopment of areas at a scale necessary to allow for the cost-effective achievement of the goals of the 30-year plan. In this regard, the very high-quality work and developments and redevelopments being done by Housing South Australia can serve as a model. And it seems to me that the proposed Planning and Urban Development Authority should work in concert with Housing SA to coordinate their work with the IDC and the goals of the 30-year plan. All of these partners working together can achieve the vision for Adelaide. The tremendous work done by previous thinker-in-residence, Professor Laura Lee, that the Premier mentioned, leading to the creation of the Integrated Design Commission, has moved the region on a path to getting great urban spaces, The focus on the buildings themselves and all of their elements, from design to green building practices, will be of utmost importance. And to see it in an integrated and comprehensive manner how neighborhoods function, how each individual part of the built environment fits in with all the other parts, how a neighborhood is connected, both internally and to the areas around it. And for all these things and more, the Integrated Design Commission, working with the new authority I am proposing, has the potential to move the greater Adelaide area into the most sustainable, attractive, and inviting area, even more so than it already is. Finally, great design can be sabotaged by poor execution and not paying attention to the small details of development. And this is something I know that Tim Horton joins me in very strongly, because those small details, when added together, are often the greatest determiner of what a building, development, or neighborhood becomes. As a part of this work, focus must be on making the central business district of Adelaide become the best walking, biking, and living place possible. The Lord Mayor and I have discussed and talked about these very issues, and I think he is very sympathetic to them. But one of the obstacles in the central business district is the design of having very wide streets lined by relatively narrow footpaths. By expanding footpaths, one provides a more comfortable pedestrian environment, as well as allowing restaurants and cafes to spill out, with seating onto that expanded space, providing an even more inviting pedestrian area. And this pedestrian space should be improved with the planting of trees and other vegetation as a way to break up the concrete jungle. Public art will also enhance this space. The result will be an environment where people want to live, to want to walk to work, to walk to play, and to walk to shop. Another obstacle in the central business district is what happens on Grenfell Street. Here is a wonderful street lined with many heritage buildings, Yet the street is wide, 2 parking lanes and at least 4 travel lanes with relatively narrow footpaths. And at rush hour, those of you who are there know that the footpaths are nearly blocked by people queuing up for their bus. And the street is dominated by buses pulling in and out of spaces as they come to the curb. Grenfell Street should be turned into a transit thoroughfare exclusively for bus traffic, I believe. The footpaths should be expanded. Good. The footpaths should be expanded by reclaiming road space. Here's what it looks like today. If you could just imagine how much nicer this would be as a place to be able to walk, to wait for that bus, to be able to attend to a cafe, which are virtually prohibited from being on there because of the nature of activities, and to be able to recognize that new bus fleets that would utilize diesel hybrid electric technology can, in fact, operate in electric-only mode for 2 or 3 kilometers. The ability for those buses to be silent and to be not polluting during the traverse here could be very exciting. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the extent of the tram must be expanded. The first tram extension on King William Street and North Terrace, as the Premier mentioned, and the second extension to the Entertainment District have been a huge success. The ridership has been phenomenal, and as I mentioned earlier, what is now needed is to extend that tram in a circle around the Central Business District. This will not only produce additional phenomenal ridership, but will also have the effect of being a transformational infrastructure investment. It will prove an incentive to redevelop the West End and in turn provide economic stimulus to attract private investment in residential living, retail, and commercial space. In this redevelopment, as it takes place, the pedestrian must be kept at the forefront of the planning. Footpaths must be expanded, safe biking corridors established, traffic calming devices adopted, more safe crossings for pedestrians, narrower streets, and longer walk cycles at all signalized intersections. The establishment of a one-way street grid should be explored to determine if it can assist in making this possible. And there are more people, as there are more people walking, there will be, by definition, less need for them to be in their vehicles on the roads nearby. My fourth area is about community involvement. Time and time again, I hear from citizens that they have not been involved in key projects or programs until well along in the development process. And likewise, I hear from government, both local and state, that when a project or program has not received the blessing to proceed, it is premature to begin discussions with the public when nothing may come of it. First and foremost, systems must be put in place that find common ground, not battleground, around these issues. And the most successful of these efforts have been, in my view, when there is a structure for citizens to become engaged through working with other citizens in their own communities. There are many models for citizen involvement from around the world. Let me describe what is used in my home. Whether this is the best for Adelaide or some other model is better suited, you all must decide. But the goal of effective engagement of the public in decisions affecting them cannot be abandoned. The Portland model is based on government assisting the creation of local, what we call neighborhood associations. These associations are formed through democratically elected officers. Their size is small enough to allow active and engaged citizens to have meaningful participation, generally on average in communities of about 5,000 citizens in total. Government is required also to engage these associations when they are making decisions affecting these neighborhoods, whether it be a proposed liquor license application or all the way up to a major new development. What is most important is how these neighborhood associations have evolved informally in their relation to government actions. First and foremost, private developers have learned they cannot take their proposal to government and expect government to overrule the neighborhood. More often than not, governing bodies in my community be that a state agency or a local council, tell the proposer that they must work with the neighborhood association to solve the areas of conflict. And over time, savvy developers begin working with the associations when the proposal is at the earliest stages of development, so that it may be designed in a way that meets the interests of both the neighborhood and the developer. In some instances, for example, a proposed liquor license where building something is not involved, it can still be an issue of intense interest to the neighborhood. In these instances, government will often require a good neighborhood agreement to be negotiated between the owner and the neighborhood association. This process has not eliminated conflict. Rather, it has allowed for formal and informal processes to be developed to work through and resolve many of the conflicts and to find that common ground rather than the more typical battleground. In addition, it has enabled citizens to become involved in the decisions that affect them and to have very meaningful ways to influence those actions. Whatever model is adopted here, it must be based on the following principles. One, it is never too early to involve citizens in issues directly affecting their neighborhoods. Or as we like to say about voting in Chicago, early and often. Second, when structures exist at the neighborhood level, it is the responsibility of the proposer of a development, program, or action to engage those neighborhood structures to work through possible concerns. And third, government must recognize and truly believe, let me stress that again, and truly believe that the outcome of this process isn't just about getting neighborhood acceptance, although it will do that, but that the process will actually produce a better product. Fifth and last in my areas of recommendation is to ensure that all parts of the community participate in the infrastructure investments. And to do this, you have to ensure that small emerging businesses have a chance to participate in large projects. Rod Hook and I have talked about this, and I think he understands and is very sensitive to this issue. But the ability to break down contracts into small, more bite-sized pieces that small emerging businesses, women-owned or Aboriginally owned businesses can actually participate. And we have found in the greater Portland region that this has been one of the most successful ways of engaging people who have generally been held back from being able to participate. Not in direct employment. You are doing a terrific job of ensuring that people who have been excluded from the processes are engaged in the direct employment. This is really about how to develop new and emerging businesses and then grow those businesses. And what I think is particularly noteworthy in our most recent project of building light rail in the Portland region, we had over 120 small businesses, some of which have participated in earlier projects for us, and garnering over $63 million worth of contracts that typically would have gone elsewhere. Well, the future of Adelaide is tremendous. You have done so much, and you have so much to work with. These recommendations and observations are offered as a means to achieve even more. Thank you.